Hey everyone, Brian here, and I am back once again with yet another episode of Nerd Theater, and I am again going to be talking about Sonic the Hedgehog in his latest film, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Now, at this point, it's no secret that this movie has been a humongous success for both Sega and Paramount Pictures. We'll get into what exactly that means outside of simply just box office numbers and financial gain for both those companies. I think there's something even larger going on here with that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, this movie made a lot of money. So to roll back the clocks a little bit, as I mentioned before in the episodes regarding the Sonic movie 1 and 2, I had not seen the movies until quite recently, so I had no real expectations for them, but I was genuinely surprised by how much I ended up liking them and enjoying them and what they had to offer. So by the time this movie came out, I was, fully prepared, and I did have expectations for this movie, and I was very, very excited. Now, we weren't there opening day, but Alyssa and I did eventually get around to going to theaters and checking out Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and I'm really glad we did, because I think this is the best one by a country mile. So before we get started and dive right into this movie, I want to make two things clear. One is, unlike the previous two Nerd Theater episodes about the Sonic movies, this will not be a scripted episode. And the reason for that is because I've only seen this movie once, and I saw it in theaters, so I didn't want to have my notes out. I didn't want any distractions. I just wanted to watch it. I didn't want to distract anyone else around me either. And so you will be getting my fresh opinions on this movie, unfiltered, unscripted. However, to maintain some semblance and some sort of structure in this video, I do have bullet points with me with some topics that I wanted to discuss regarding the movie. And the second thing is, there will be spoilers in this review. Now, I know I spoiled the hell out of the first two movies, but being a couple years old at least, and the first movie being 4 years old, I felt it more appropriate than spoiling the third movie here. While I will be going into spoilers later on in the video, there's going to be a clear wall in between the first part of this video and then the back half where I get into more intricate story details. So I'm going to give a spoiler warning here, and before I talk more about the nitty-gritty stuff, I'm going to give an additional spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'd honestly recommend checking it out for multiple reasons, but if nothing else, checking it out before I spoil it here and then coming back and seeing for yourself. But I will be giving a warning anyway, so just a heads up there. But without further ado, let's start talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So Sonic the Hedgehog 3 picks up right where the events of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 left off. We have a newcomer, Knuckles and Tails, who have joined Sonic's family with Tom and Maddie. They're all living a happy life together. But before we get to that, there's a little payoff to a teaser that you may have remembered from the last film. Of course, I'm referring to Shadow the Hedgehog. Now, Shadow is, I think, besides Sonic, I would say probably the most popular character of the series. He has a huge fan base surrounding him, and it's so funny to me because what initially started as a character who was made for one game, he's made for Sonic Adventure 2, ended up becoming so popular that despite his sacrifice at the end of that game, they ended up bringing him back, and now he's just a main staple. And I thought that was a good choice, A, because he's incredibly popular, but B, he just fits really well into the full cast of Sonic characters. And so seeing him announced, teased for in the second movie, and brought back in this one was really, really exciting. And they don't keep you waiting too long. In fact, the cold open of this movie before the title even drops is Shadow the Hedgehog being kind of observed and guarded on Prison Island by some members of the Gun military. So, again, going back to what I said in my Sonic 2 review, I love that they set up Gun early on, because now that we have Shadow here, it feels like a natural progression. It feels like this has been built up to for a couple movies now, and man, do they deliver. So as you probably know by now, Shadow the Hedgehog is voiced in this movie by Keanu Reeves, which I think was an incredible casting decision. A, because Keanu Reeves is a house name, people love him, especially with the John Wick movies as of recent. I think he's always been an A-lister, he's always been a name that's going to draw people in, but with John Wick, I think even more so. I think there's kind of a resurgence of his popularity in modern blockbusters. So I think it was really, really smart on Paramount and Sega to pick a well-known actor like Keanu. But to me, it also just made sense. I just pictured in my head what a Keanu Reeves shadow would sound like, and I was like, yeah, no, I can picture it already. And yeah, he does a great job. I think it can't be stressed enough how well the entire cast does here. The dynamic has really been figured out. We'll get into characterization a little bit later, but man, does everyone just feel very, very comfortable in their roles. From Ben Schwartz to Idris Elba, Colleen O'Shaughnessy, and now, of course, Keanu Reeves. They just all feel like they know their characters well. They feel like well-worn gloves, and they just work off of each other marvelously. And I think that's probably most on display in this movie, most of all. But I've talked about Shadow. What's going on with Sonic and the gang? Well, we flash back to Green Hills, Montana, where Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Tom, and Maddie are all on a race. Well, they're not all racing. To set things up a little bit, Sonic and Tails and Knuckles, they're all lined up together, and they're getting ready to have a race. And if you know Sonic, you know he's probably going to be the one who wins this thing. So at first I was like, okay, what's going on here? What's this race really about? So the characters dart off, they have this big race, and as it goes on, you learn that Tails and Knuckles, they're keeping pace with Sonic, which doesn't quite make sense. He's the fastest thing alive. How are his two pals catching him? Well, what really happened here was Tails programmed two holographic versions of himself and Knuckles, kind of like a build off of what he did in the second movie with his little cloning device thing that he did at the dance and at the end of the final fight in the movie. But he does that again here to duplicate himself and Knuckles. Sonic ends up finding out that they're fake, so he runs back to where Tom, Maddie, Tails, and Knuckles are, only to find that they have thrown him a secret surprise birthday party. And so that's what starts off the movie. And I really like this as an opener for Sonic and the gang. And let me explain why. So Shadow, who we start the movie off with, we start with him on Prison Island being watched by gun officers and military troops. And he's in this containment chamber. And he's all alone. He's cold, he's isolated, and he busts out. And he fights off all the gun military in a really cool sequence that showcases his chaos power. And then he escapes Prison Island with a vengeance. But he's cold, he's angry, he's mean, and more importantly, he's all alone. Now, flash forward to Sonic and the gang. Sonic himself is surrounded by his loved ones. He's racing with them, he's playing with them, he's having a birthday party thrown for him, and just all around having a lot of warmth and kindness around him, which I think is a really, really nice parallel that I don't think is any mistake. I think it was a deliberate setup, and you'll see as the movie goes along how that continues to build and build and build. Now, Shadow, as a character, his in-game conception, going back to the games, he was established to basically be a parallel to Sonic. I mean, literally, his shadow. And he's kind of an example of, if put in the wrong environment, if given, given events that were tragic or kind of shattering or breaking Sonic down, he would probably have turned into a character like Shadow. Shadow is every left turn that Sonic could have made formed into a being. So yeah, without giving too much away, they really do the duality of Sonic and Shadow incredibly well in this movie. But let's get back to Sonic and Friends. So we start this movie out on a very light note with Sonic's birthday party. However, his birthday party is cut extremely short. before they can even have the cake and enjoy a nice campfire, because they're out in the woods on a camping trip as well, I should mention. But before they can enjoy any of that, a helicopter lands in the middle of their campground and interrupts the whole entire party. And it's none other than a Gunn military helicopter. And Gunn, this time, is partially led by Kristen Ritter, who is awesome. I love Kristen Ritter. I really enjoyed her in Breaking Bad. I really liked her in Jessica Jones. And it was awesome to see her in a pretty significant role in this movie. But getting back to the story, Gunn Military says they need the help of Team Sonic and take them to Tokyo to stop a recently escaped life form who is wreaking havoc in the city. And I think you can tell who that's gonna be. But they leave the campsite, stranding Tom and Maddie, and taking the trio of our animal friends to Tokyo in order to deal with this new ultimate life form. And honestly, I think the helicopter scene and the lead-in to the scene in Tokyo, downtown Tokyo, I think it's what won me over for the movie. I think that's really where I started to get super engaged and realize, okay, this is going to be as good as the last film, if not even better. Because I liked the cold open. I thought it worked really well. I thought it was a cool way to establish Shadow officially and not just tease him like in the post-credits scene. And they finally started to give him some characteristics, and we started to learn a little bit more about him as audience members. And I thought that was all fine and good. I like Sonic's birthday party, but the scene in the helicopter when they're all suiting up, when Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are getting ready to come together and be Team Sonic once again, I think this is where the movie really won me over, and I was just full in on it for the rest of its runtime. Like I mentioned before with the voice actors, the voices are perfect. The characterizations here are down pat. I mean, we have Sonic as the fearless, arrogant, loudmouth leader who's cracking jokes. We have Tails, who's the whiz. He's smart, super heartfelt, and he's brave. And we have Knuckles, the comical, bullheaded, but also pretty wise echidna who we've grown to love by this point. But this whole interaction, it feels like it was pulled straight from a Sonic game. And what game specifically, you might ask? Well, with Shadow the Hedgehog's inclusion acting as a pretty big hint, Sonic Adventure 2. They take a lot from Sonic Adventure 2 in this movie, in the best way possible. In fact, they actually pull a direct line from the game in this scene.
Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies. I'm out of here. I like running better.
Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies. We're out of here.
And here's where we meet Shadow. Now, if you remember back in Sonic Adventure 2, there's a boss fight early on with this robot from Gunn, and after you take him out, Shadow the Hedgehog appears. And it's kind of become an iconic moment in the game series, and they recreate it here in a really, really well done way. Now, the gang, they try to at first reason with Shadow and say, hey, you know, like, you're not too different from us. Why can't we just talk this out? You know, why are you on this path of destruction? Of course, Shadow is not willing to listen to any of this, and he fights off the entire gang. And if you know Shadow's history, this interaction makes perfect sense. Now, Sonic and friends, they're coming down to meet Shadow. They jumped out of a Gunn helicopter. And if you know Shadow's relationship with Gunn, it's not a very positive one. So to see these characters who look and act very similar to him being joined forces with an organization that Shadow completely despises, it's going to put an immediate wedge in between the group. And that wedge just grows more and more and more. Now, I will say, up to this point, I've only talked about things that have either been revealed in the trailers or revealed in promotional material or like little sneak peeks on YouTube. So I don't really consider any of that spoiler territory. However, we are now getting into spoiler territory. So if the first warning didn't ward you off, I will say if you haven't seen the movie yet, I would highly recommend pausing the video, watching it, and then coming back later, because I'm really going to dive full on into story details here. So you have been warned. But going off from there, Sonic in the game failed to apprehend Shadow. He solos like all of them pretty quickly, makes quick work of them. This whole fight scene between Sonic and friends and Shadow was really, really cool. It was really satisfying to see on screen, and it was just honestly a treat just to hear these voice actors bounce off of each other as well. But like I mentioned before, the gang fails in stopping Shadow, who gets on his motorcycle. Again, another little nice reference to the character. He gets on his motorcycle. I'm not sure where he got it. I think he just stole it, if I'm remembering right. But he rides off, and Sonic chases him. And this is a really, really cool chase sequence. Now, we've seen Sonic in these movies get chased by Eggman countless times, but to have him go through a chase sequence with a character who's essentially his equal, with a little more power as being the ultimate life form, it was really exciting and fun. Shadow, a really cool detail I liked was he's powering his bike with his chaos energy, which looked awesome. In this movie, it's kind of shown as like orange lightning, and it looked really, really cool. And of course, Sonic is pushing himself to the limit, and so we see Sonic's blue energy powering him up. So Sonic's chasing him on foot while Shadow's on a bike. They ride up this tall building, and Shadow, of course, ends this fight on top, and really showing himself as a formidable force. And Sonic and the gang are going to have to regroup and really think about how they want to deal with this guy next. Now, I mentioned the characters, I mentioned their voices, I mentioned the characterization, but one little detail that I really do appreciate here, I want to talk about Sonic himself for a second. If you look at Sonic's design in the first movie compared to the second movie and then the third movie, there's been an undeniable change. And I didn't notice this until I started doing editing work on the second Sonic movie for Nerd Theater, and I realized, oh my gosh, they're slowly changing Sonic's look, because I was working with some trailer footage for this movie as well, and that's when it became clear to me they're aging Sonic in these movies. And it's really subtle, but if you look back to the first one, he's really short. He's got like more cartoonish, almost Mickey Mouse-like features. He looks more kiddish and more cutesy. Second movie, he's probably like tweenish, looks a little more mature. But by this movie, he's got a lot more sharper features. And I really appreciate that attention to detail. I like that as the characters are growing, like as characters, they're having large series-wide arcs. I really appreciate that they're also simultaneously going through physical changes too. It makes it feel like you're growing with these characters, and I feel like that would be even more satisfying for like a younger audience, like kids like me who like loved Sonic when they were younger, who are watching these movies now, and as they're getting older, they're kind of growing up with Sonic too. So a really, really cool detail that just shows the level of attention and care that these movies are being made with. So this movie has a much more emotional storyline than the first two, has a darker storyline as well. If you're a parent or if you have a family that you want to go see this with, it's not that dark. It is still a family movie, but they do handle some heavier topics in this movie, and they do it extremely well. And if you know Shadow the Hedgehog, you know that he's going to be the one adding that weight to this movie. So to give a little background, strictly speaking for this film, Shadow the Hedgehog's backstory is very similar in this film as it is to the game. So Shadow, he was a test experiment made by Gerald Robotnik, who is also featured in this movie. Now, Robotnik, that's a name that we've heard before. That's right. Gerald Robotnik is the grandfather of our beloved Dr. Robotnik himself, or Dr. Eggman, if you know him by that. But Gerald created Shadow years and years ago as the ultimate life form, I believe back in the 60s. I believe this movie shows Shadow's flashback taking place in the 60s. And all the while he's performing this research and doing tests on Shadow, he is joined by his granddaughter, Maria, who he takes with him everywhere. and Shadow and Maria take a liking to each other. They become kind of like surrogate brother and sister. And a lot of this movie, they take a lot of time showing Shadow's bond with Maria, how the two of them interact, how they kind of grow up together as brother and sister. They watch movies together. Shadow like roller skates and has Maria like hold on and like kind of like jet ski on the floor. Little fun stuff like that. But this is all as a means to build up Shadow's character and endear the audiences to him. And it's done really, really well. It's set to a Traveling Wilburys song, End of the Line, I think it is. And while that song didn't actually come out in the 60s, it doesn't really matter. I didn't really care. I think it fit the mood perfectly, and it was a nice way to quickly show in a montage the relationship between these two characters. And we get a nice little scene where Shadow and Maria, who knows that Shadow's not technically supposed to leave the confines of the research facility, sneaks him out, and they sit out in a nice field and look up at the stars. And this is where we get a nice little setup, where Maria says something along the lines of, even when the brightest star is gone, it's like in the daytime, it's still there. And so that sets up Shadow's character and his arc that he's going to have throughout the rest of this movie. And I just want to say, I love the Maria plot line in this movie. Sonic Adventure 2 introduces Maria and Gerald, as well as Shadow himself, and you get little glimpses of their life and their relationship together and what Maria and Gerald at one point meant to Shadow. But I'm just going to say it here, as a big Sonic fan, I think this movie does the Maria and Gerald storyline better than the games, at least for Sonic Adventure 2 and like Shadow the Hedgehog's sake. I really, really think that they improved on that story, improved on that flashback and that backstory, and really, really fleshed it out. I found myself getting emotional during this movie. I found it to be really impactful and effective. It was a hard-hitting flashback. So, of course, with all these warm and fuzzy moments with Shadow and Maria, there is an inevitable fallout. A little twinge of what's to come we get in a scene where Shadow and Maria are watching a monster movie. And this is where a really, really cool reference comes into play. So if you've played Sonic Adventure 2, you remember that the final boss fight in that game is called the Bio Lizard, who is also a test experiment of Gerald Robotnik's, who was originally supposed to be the ultimate life form, kind of competing with Shadow. It's like a weird creature-sibling rivalry, I guess you could say. But BioLizard is not in this movie. Just to put that out there, he is not the final fight in this film. They do have the Eclipse cannon from the game, but BioLizard is nowhere to be seen. Except in the flashback scene, when Shadow and Maria are watching a monster movie together, we see the monster in the movie is the BioLizard. And I thought that was great. Shadow says to Maria, he asks her later on, he says, "Do you think I'm like the monster in that movie? Am I no better than him? Am I just a creature for destruction?" And man, what a clever way to bring in the BioLizard without actually making him a threat or like a plot conflict, because it thematically perfectly encapsulates what the BioLizard's original purpose was in the first place. It was to show, as much as Shadow is to show what Sonic could have become, BioLizard is an example of what Shadow could become if he goes down a dark path and becomes a creature of destruction. And I thought that was so clever, really honestly kind of a stroke of genius in the writing. And that's just something I want to say too. As much of an improvement the visuals have in this movie, the characterizations of the characters, and all around just feeling more like a Sonic game, I think the writing took a step up too. This is a really well done, tight script. Now, there's been a lot of talk of Gerald Robotnik, but where is the Robotnik? What's he been up to? Well, despite falling into a fiery explosion in the last movie, Jim Carrey is once again back as Dr. Ivo Robotnik. And not just him, but Agent Stone is back too. And they're not in as impressive of a state as they were in the previous film. Stone is still holding himself together, and he's being a loyal assistant to Ivo Robotnik, but Eggman himself, he's looking rough. Sonic and the gang follow Agent Stone after I will say just shortly, a quick spoiler of a character, the General of Gun from the previous two films dies. And he's having a meeting with Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles in a really cool Chow Garden restaurant that was a really fun, funny scene in the movie. But however, before he can give Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles important bits of information, he's taken out. And there's a motorcycle driver who rides away. Sonic and the gang follow him, and they're led to Dr. Eggman's lair. And they walk inside, and they see that Eggman is... his whole lair is a sty. It's a pigsty. He's laying back in his chair. He's got a big old beer gut. His hair is super long. His mustache has grown out of control. And he's just sitting around watching soap operas and eating microwavable burritos. So he's not doing too well. But this was a really funny way to reintroduce the character. Like I said before, they kind of pull a Michael Myers Halloween 4. In the last time we saw him, he literally blew up, but he's back. And kind of like Michael Myers, you don't really care that much. It's like, all right, we're just glad to see him back. And I think that Sega and Paramount were wise to do this because the way that they left Robotnik in the second movie, it looked like he was probably dead or maybe not. They leave it a little vague in the end credits scene. However, I think this was smart in the sense that they weren't completely sure if Jim Carrey was going to come back. Jim Carrey himself didn't know. They didn't know. And so leaving it open like that, both A, is a smart move. If he doesn't come back, then you don't have an empty promise. And B, if he does come back, it's a nice surprise for anyone who didn't see the trailer, I guess. So it's cool to see him back once more. And in my opinion, like I said, for the first movie at least, I'm not sure if this is exactly the case for the second film. I think that Robotnik is one of the, if not the brightest shining star in this movie. This is honestly, I'm not even being funny when I say this. I think this is unironically one of Jim Carrey's best performances in his career. And I'm keeping that in mind. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, The Mask, Truman Show, all that good stuff. Great films. But I really, really liked what Jim Carrey did with Robotnik here. He ends up being one of the most emotionally charged characters in the whole movie. So, Sonic and the gang see Eggman in his unimpressive state. However, they realize, they share the news with Eggman that someone else has been using his tech and his drones. And Eggman, of course, is pissed about this. And it's the shot in the arm that he needs to get up off his ass and get back out there and start doing what he does best. However, they're more than apprehensive, the group, in partnering with each other. But I found this to be a really refreshing and unique take on the Sonic and Eggman dynamic in the movies. If we were to have Sonic and Eggman just go toe-to-toe again, eventually they do become at odds once more. But to force these characters to join forces and partner with each other was a lot of fun. I love when movies pit characters with another who would otherwise want nothing to do with one another, and I think they did that really well here. So, who could possibly be using Dr. Eggman's equipment other than his grandfather, Gerald Robotnik? In fact, Gerald knew that this tech and the mention of this tech would be a breadcrumb trail to lead Ivo, Sonic, and the gang to his lair, which is an abandoned research facility that we saw in the flashback sequences of the movie. So to give a little background, Shadow was stolen from Gerald years and years ago. The experiments weren't going quite the way that Gerald wanted or that the powers that be wanted, and so Gun Military bust into the research facility, and Gerald is running away with Maria and Shadow in a desperate attempt to escape. And resisting the Gun Military, they attack Gerald, Maria, and Shadow. And through an accident, one of the Gun Military troops points a gun at Maria and Shadow, and they say, no, don't do it, don't shoot them. And one of the other officers slaps the gun away, but he fires, and he hits like a pressurized tank or like some explosive, and it causes a big explosion, which kills Maria, leaving Gerald and Shadow alive. And it knocks Shadow out, so of course they're able to apprehend him, put him in the containment chamber where he has been locked up for years and years and years. Like 40 years or something, if I'm right in my assumption that it was the 60s that they were going back to. But yeah, so Maria dies. After all that build-up and all that endearment between the two characters, Gunn kills her, which perfectly gives you a great idea of why Shadow is so angry at Gunn Military and why he's just so upset and jaded with the world as a whole. And I think they did this well here. A lot of people were kind of anticipating, okay, and they were speculating, all right, what is going to happen to Maria? With Shadow, you gotta have Maria in there. She's such a large part of Shadow's story. She was introduced the same time that Shadow was, so you can't have one without the other. It's such a large part of his character, and if you know the games, you know that Maria was shot. I mean, in a Sonic game, in a kid's game, they straight up kill a kid. I remember being shocked by it and how dark it was when I was younger, and I too was wondering, are they actually going to do this? And the answer is yes and no. Like I said, the incident is a lot less direct. They shoot a explosive of some sort, and that ends up killing her. So while it wasn't a direct bullet, Gunn is undeniably responsible for her death. So I think it was a more family-friendly way to say the same thing. And I could see some people maybe getting mad about it because it seems like more of an accident, but they were fully intending on killing that kid. So I think the point is still reached, and I think it still makes sense as far as building Shadow's character. So I was fine with it, and I mean, it's a kid's movie. You don't really expect a kid to get shot in it. Although I guess you don't expect a kid to get shot in a kid's game either, but I digress. And Gerald and his grandson, Ivo Robotnik, finally meet face to face for the first time ever. And Ivo he's overcome, he's overjoyed, and he's overwhelmed with emotions. He finally got to meet his grandfather. Now, a little fun thing that they kind of set up, whether intentionally or not or so, kind of similar to how I felt about the Gunn organization. Eggman is definitely a loner in these movies. He's really got no one other than Agent Stone. He doesn't really have any family, and he missed out on a loving, warm childhood. And so when he finally gets to meet his grandfather, he asks, why didn't you come sooner? Why is this the first time we're meeting? Gerald gives an excuse, one of which I'm kind of forgetting right now, but he just says he wasn't able to reach him for one reason or the other. But now that they're finally together, they can make up for all those lost years. And so we get a really fun montage sequence where they have VR headsets on, and they're doing everything they would have done as grandson and grandfather for years and years. And it was really funny, but it was also kind of sad too. It gives a little more emotion, a little more depth to the Eggman character in these movies. You do kind of get a sense why he ended up being such an angry, bitter, evil, mad scientist. It's because he missed out on a lot of those fatherly/grandfatherly, in this case, experiences. And I should put this out there, if you didn't know this already, Jim Carrey is doubling his talents here by playing both Ivo Robotnik and Gerald Robotnik. So you get a dual performance here, and man, does he kill it. It's really, really funny. I think this adds to why I think this is one of Jim Carrey's best performances, is because he's giving us two performances in one movie. They even make a joke about it at one point, which was really funny. But seeing these two characters on screen was great. They kind of pull the Parent Trap as far as like putting both characters on screen at once, and it's seamless. It looks great. I think they had like a double for Gerald, and then they, I think in post, like added Jim Carrey's face to the double. I'm not sure exactly how they technically did it, but whatever the case, it works really, really well. And the two performances are similar because, of course, they're related, so they have to act somewhat, alike. But they're also varied in a really interesting and unique way, and that becomes more and more apparent as the movie goes on. But I just want to say I loved watching these characters together. They were really funny. They're back and forth. They're similar interests, but then also their differences. Gerald is a little more old-fashioned. His viewpoints of the world are a little more outdated than Eggman, obviously. He's much older. Eggman is more zany, more goofy, and more ready to boast his intelligence, whereas Gerald is a little more hard-boiled while still being goofy because it's a Jim Carrey performance. And he's also a little more reserved in some ways that Ivo is not. And so it was cool to see those two characters bounce off of one another. However, that kind of leaves Agent Stone as a third wheel. A lot of this movie is dealing with the arc and the kind of weird, almost love triangle of Gerald, Ivo, and Stone. Now, like I mentioned in Sonic 2, there are homoerotic undertones throughout the series with Stone and Dr. Eggman. I don't think it was a mistake then, and I definitely don't think it's a mistake now because they make it a full-on character arc thing. Stone is downright jealous of the relationship that Ivo and Gerald have, and he gets thrown on the back burner and pushed to the sidelines for most of the movie, and it was honestly pretty interesting to see. It was a development of these characters that I didn't expect, but it challenged the bond and it challenged the relationship and what you thought of the characters as a whole. So it kind of leaves Agent Stone and Shadow, who of course eventually pairs up with Gerald, Eggman, and Stone, and they form this kind of evil alliance, and wouldn't you know it, they betray Sonic and friends once again. And so Agent Stone and Shadow kind of have like a funny side-like relationship together. So that ended up being a unique element to the movie that I think makes it all the better. Also, whether or not you've seen the movie, you probably have seen the dance scene between Ivo and Gerald Robotnik. There's a moment later on in the movie when they have to sneak into gun military headquarters and steal this MacGuffin. It's some sort of device or piece. I don't know if it's like a jewel or something. I'm honestly forgetting what it is right now, but it is a MacGuffin that's going to be used later on to power up the Eclipse Cannon, which is this giant weapon in space that is going to shoot a giant laser beam into the Earth. It's the Death Star, but it's this device they're trying to find to power that up. And in order to get there, there's a bunch of lasers. There's a laser field blocking it. However, Ivo Robotnik has just the thing. They strap on these two suits that pull the laser beams in and cause no harm to either one of them. And they can't just walk through because they're Robotniks. They got to do some goofy thing to get past these lasers. And so they do a dance sequence that is... It's the best dance sequence that Eggman's done so far. It was hilarious. Seeing these two dance together, Ivo picks up Gerald at one point and spinning him around. They're dancing side by side, locking shoulders, back to back, all sorts of things. It was hilarious. The theater I was in was filled with laughter, and it was one of those moments where I'm like, man, I'm glad that I decided to see this movie in theaters because it was hilarious. So I've talked about character arcs. What are the arcs of Sonic and the gang? Well, something that I really appreciate about these movies is they feel like they're building on each other. These feel like the same characters we've been with since the first and the second movie. I love that Sonic learns lessons in these movies that carry over into the sequels and shape him as a character. It really forms who he is, his principles, and what he believes in, and how true he is to himself and his friends. That's all here. And he feels like the character that he was meant to be. It feels very, very, very in line with the last movies. And so I really appreciated that character continuity. The same is true for Tails and Knuckles. Tails feels a lot more brave. He feels a lot more ready to jump into the line of action, more so than he was in the second movie. And Knuckles feels like he's learned a lot more about loyalty. There's a scene where Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are actually at odds. So what happens is, to give another character spoiler, Tom is attacked by Shadow when he and Maddie go undercover and get in disguises in a really funny sequence at Gun Military HQ that ends in a not so funny way. Shadow apprehends Tom and he knocks him out, and he hits him so hard with a Chaos Spear, I think it is. He hits him so hard that it seems like he's gonna die. He ends up just getting hospitalized, but that's enough for Sonic to get set off. He is super, super upset, and he goes and meets Wade, and he steals the Master Emerald from him, and he powers up to be Supersonic, and Knuckles and Tails aren't too happy with this decision. They try to talk reason into Sonic, who won't listen. He's seeing red, and he wants to use the Chaos Emerald's power to go super and take out Shadow in an act of revenge. And while they disagree with Sonic, Knuckles and Tails do end up stepping aside, and Knuckles says something along the lines of like, we need to be loyal as a team, like, even if we don't always agree with one another. And I found that to be a really, like, surprising moment in the movie. It was a really mature moment in the movie where it shows these characters at odds with one another and butting heads, but eventually coming to terms and compromising with one another. Like, it feels like they really understood Sonic's emotions here, even if they didn't agree with how he was expressing them. And so Sonic takes off, goes to space, finds where Shadow is, and the two of them end up having an awesome fight scene. Sonic knocks him into the face of the moon and is just wailing on him. And a really funny, kind of sweet moment in the theater happened here. Alyssa and I, we were sitting somewhere in the middle, because that's where you get the best sound. If you know, you know. But we were sitting somewhere in the middle of the theater, and there was a kid in front of us, and as Sonic was just putting a mollywop on Shadow, it looks like, if you don't know any better, if you're a kid and you're unaware that this is a PG movie, it does look like Sonic is going to kill Shadow here. And as this is happening, Sonic's ready to drop the last blow, and Shadow says, like, do it, I'm right here. And he points to his heart, and there's this kid who's sitting in front of Alyssa and I, and his eyes are like this big, and he's got his hands on his head. Like, no, don't do it, Sonic, don't do it. And it was really, really funny. And it was just honestly a pretty sweet moment of, like, you could tell the kids, the target audience for this movie, they were fully into it, and they were just getting wrapped up in it emotionally too. And so if that doesn't say the movie works, I don't know what does. But I really thought that was an enjoyable theater moment, and it was another instance of me being very glad that I decided to see this on a big screen. But before Sonic enacts his revenge completely, he remembers what his good friend Tom told him about staying true to what's inside. And it's actually Shadow's moment of pointing to his own heart where Sonic realizes this. And he turns off the super mode, and he sits on the moon and just talks with Shadow, reflecting and paralleling the scene out in the field, looking up at the stars that Shadow had with Maria. And it's here where Shadow reuses Maria's line about, even when the brightest star is gone, it's still there, or something along those lines. I might be butchering the quote here, but it's something like that. And this is what causes Shadow to flip to the good side. Now, meanwhile, what's been happening is Ivo and Gerald Robotnik go up to the Eclipse Cannon, and Gerald shares with Ivo his plans for world domination by just using the Eclipse Cannon to straight up blow up Earth and just take over. And Ivo Robotnik, Eggman, he's evil, but he's not that evil. And he's kind of taken aback by these plans. And he realizes that Gerald's intentions weren't quite as pure, even on a grandfatherly level, as much as he thought they were. Yeah, it turns out Gerald was using Ivo the whole time. And the goofier elements of Gerald kind of more or less go away here. He drops the facade. The mask comes off completely. And we get a more game-accurate version of Gerald Robotnik, like he would have appeared in like Sonic Adventure 2. Not that much though. It is obviously still this movie universe's take on Gerald Robotnik. But it was cool to see that he wasn't just here to be a second foil to Sonic, or a second form of comic relief. Obviously, Eggman has become more than a comic relief character in these movies, but it was nice to see that Gerald served a deeper purpose. And seeing the veil come off and seeing him fully turn on his own grandson, Ivo, honestly shocked me, even though I was aware of the Gerald and Robotnik backstory in the games. Now, again, I will say this is this movie's version of Gerald Robotnik, so I wouldn't go in expecting seeing him getting gunned down by a firing squad or anything like that. But here is where we get the most interesting, in my opinion, and also the most shocking character arc of the entire movie, Dr. Eggman himself. Now, like I said, Eggman is evil, but world domination, it's not really his cup of tea. And so he's honestly disgusted by the betrayal of his grandfather, Gerald. But not only that, he's disgusted by his end game, his desire to end the world and take over completely. And so even though Gerald is someone who lost everything in his eyes, he lost Shadow before, and he lost his own granddaughter Maria, world domination seems like a pretty big leap, even for Eggman. And so Eggman turns on his own grandfather, and the two end up getting into a fight, a really comical fight. Obviously, the fights between Shadow and the other characters in the movie are a much more serious, action-packed kind of fight scene, whereas Ivo versus Gerald is more of a funny slapstick scene. It is cool. It serves its purpose in the story. It does have the conflict between the two characters, but there's stuff like them refusing to touch the other one's mustache as a form of code, like, hey, don't touch the facial hair, you know? It's stuff like that. So it's a little more of a comedic scene, but I found that it worked really well. And honestly, this scene where we reveal that Gerald is no longer partnering with Ivo Robotnik, it has one of the most hard-hitting lines in the entire movie.
I can have you now. We're family. We have each other. Oh, Ivo. You're no Maria.
And that hit pretty hard. I was honestly taken aback by that line. And that's another example of what I mean by this script just feeling stronger. It feels like they're taking the audience a little more seriously. They're taking it to a darker, more emotional place. Like if you told me that this sort of line would have come about in the first movie, I wouldn't have quite believed you. But there's enough stakes with the audience in this movie. We've been with these characters long enough that they can start really pulling their punches a little bit less with stuff like this. And I found this portrayal to be completely effective. But like I said, there are still some cartoonish shenanigans here, and even though it seems like Eggman has been defeated by his grandfather, he is redeemed at the last second and defeats him once and for all. And it was really funny. It got a big laugh out of the audience, and it got a big laugh out of me. Let's get back to what's happening with Sonic and Shadow on the moon. So, they are now partnered. Shadow has seen the errors of his ways, and even though he has suffered a lot of loss, so has Sonic. And Sonic's whole point here in getting Shadow to come to the light side is everyone suffers some form of loss at one point or another. And it's really what we decide to do with that loss and do with those shortcomings that will really define us for who we are. And I found that to be a pretty cool message, a pretty powerful message, and I think it's a good message for younger audiences to see. And so it wins over Shadow, and the two of them realize, hey, we gotta stop this eclipse cannon from happening. We can't let Earth just get destroyed. Even though Shadow was once angry at the world, he now sees that they don't deserve to perish. There's a lot of good people on the planet Earth, and he becomes the hero that he was destined to be, and he and Sonic partner up, use the power of the Chaos Emeralds to both turn super in an awesome scene. And they do the famous, if you know, you know, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. They dap each other up, and they turn super in a recreation of their super formation in Sonic Adventure 2 way back in the day. And it was awesome. That alone would have been cool. but they go the extra mile, they go above and beyond, and they even play the hit song from Sonic Adventure 2, Live and Learn by Crush 40. And I would be lying to say if I didn't think that was awesome. I think it was a perfect use of that song, and I think Jeff Fowler himself, the director of this movie and the other two previous movies, said that he knew he couldn't do this story. He couldn't do the Sonic Adventure 2 storyline without including Crush 40's song Live and Learn, because it's such an iconic song. It's been used as a recurring theme in the Sonic games for years after that original game came out, and it worked perfectly here. It completely sold that moment, and I loved it. It was awesome seeing Super Sonic and Super Shadow on screen coming together while Live and Learn plays, and they fly off to take on the Eclipse Cannon. It really, really worked for me, and I think it was probably the highlight of the entire film, in my opinion. Which, of course, brings me back to the musical elephant in the room. What is the score like for this movie? Now, if you remember my past two Sonic movie reviews, a big gripe that I had was the music itself. Now, Sonic, it is no secret that Sonic the Hedgehog has an iconic soundtrack as far as the games are concerned. Every single game, for the most part, almost always delivers on the music front. Now, quality of the games themselves, that's also no secret. Quality has peaks and valleys in the Sonic franchise. I'll be the first to admit that. But one thing that is almost always true is that the score and the soundtrack is gonna really, really work. Now, did they kind of fix that from the first two movies? Did they have more Sonic music within this movie? I would say yes. Obviously, Live and Learn is used here. There's some small game samples, game music samples being used throughout the movie. For example, there's one scene where Sonic and friends are trying to break into Gun HQ, and they have a small little medley from Escape from the City, the first level in Sonic Adventure 2. So there's a lot more of the music from the games here. Still, not as much as I would maybe prefer. However, I think it's more than enough to satiate your average Sonic fan, myself included, and I was really, really hyped to hear it, and especially hear Live and Learn at the most important part of the climax. So I was really blown away by that. I was really happy with what they did. Tom Holkenberg, otherwise known as his stage name, Junkie XL, returned to compose the score for this movie, and he really stepped his game up. Like I said before, I don't want to discredit him. I think his score for the first two movies were perfectly fine. I think they worked really well, and I think they're very serviceable and well done for movie scores. Just me personally, I wished that the first two movies would have had more Sonic music or Sonic-inspired music, but that's definitely the case here. I feel like the notes from fans or audience members alike were taken, and I think that Tom Holkenberg really stepped up his game and really made a score that felt a lot more at home within the Sonic universe. And I think the same is true for this movie as a whole. I feel like this movie just feels like it is within the Sonic universe fully. I mean, if you go back to the first movie, that feels more like an adventure / road trip action movie that has Sonic the Hedgehog in it. I think he is fully fleshed out now. I feel like by the time you get to this movie, this feels like a movie that's just taking place in Sonic's world. So with Gerald Robotnik dead, Super Sonic and Super Shadow fly up to the Eclipse Cannon, and with the help of Tails and Knuckles and also Dr. Eggman, the group is able to point away the Eclipse Cannon from destroying Earth. And in fact, in doing so, through a set of circumstances, Eggman has no choice but to perform a self-sacrifice. But before doing so, he broadcasts himself on a giant Jumbotron, and he gives a final message to the Earth. But more specifically, he gives a final message to Agent Stone, who he basically all but confesses his love for. I mean, it could be argued that it's more of a partnership, friend kind of love or appreciation. I think there's something a little bit more going on here, but he basically says to Agent Stone, "I'm sorry I treated you like crap, and I do truly care about you. You were the only one who ever cared about me." And he realizes that Gerald Robotnik's love for him was a facade. It was fake. Whereas Agent Stone, it was real. And he says, "I love the way you made your goat milk coffee and the way that you made up my lattes." And it's a funny scene, but it's also a really genuinely moving scene, which I think cements this performance from Jim Carrey as one of his best. And I found it to be genuinely touching. I found it to be a nice way to wrap up the Eggman-Agent Stone relationship and arc. And with that, Eggman signs off his final message and sacrifices himself. And unlike Sonic Movie 2, it's a little more ambiguous as to whether or not he's going to come back, and I'll get into my thoughts on that later. But Eggman's not the only one who performs a self-sacrifice. Yes, that's right. Shadow himself is lost in the shuffle, very much in line with the original Sonic Adventure 2 game, his debut, where he also performs a self-sacrifice in order to save the world. And we don't really know whether or not Shadow's going to be coming back. But if history repeats itself, which I think it probably will, more likely than not, we're going to see Shadow once more. And with that, Sonic and the gang are free to return home, grateful for the alliance of Shadow the Hedgehog, and fully thinking that their newfound friend has deceased. They go back home, and they finally finish Sonic's birthday party with Tom and Maddie. And they once again, the three of them have a real race, and of course, Sonic being Sonic, he far outruns his friends, leaving them in the dust. And that's where the movie ends. And it was great. I really, really liked this movie. Like I said, I think overall it's the best one that they've done so far. I really enjoyed the first two movies, but man, did they up the ante on this third film. I feel like the emotion and the comedy, again, I do want to stress, even though this is, I guess, the darker of the three movies, it is still really, really funny. And I like that even this late into the game, they haven't sacrificed that comedic tone. Because it's Sonic. I mean, Sonic has humor. Right? Sonic himself, the other characters, I think you need that levity. And I'm glad that they found a way to organically maintain that without sacrificing the more serious elements of the movie. After Alyssa and I saw this movie, we were talking about it on the way home, and we were talking about how this movie series, they've kind of cornered a market that is kind of in a bit of a drought, in my opinion, and that's the family movie. It really, really works. All three of these movies, I think this one most so, really work as family films. Now, that's not to say there aren't family movies that still come out, and that's not to say that there aren't great family movies that come out, but a lot of family films kind of have the guarantee of parents buying a ticket along with their kids. I mean, a lot of kids aren't going to go see a children's movie by themselves because they're kids. So they have their parents come with them. So those are kind of like built-in guaranteed tickets. We got to appease the children, but the parents, the adults in the audience are a little less of a concern because they're pretty much already going to be there no matter what. However, this movie doesn't fall to that. I like that there's a lot there in this movie that adults can enjoy. There's adult humor, obviously nothing too crass, but there's like witty jokes, there's clever jokes that are gonna fly right over kids' heads. There's emotional themes that I think anyone can take away from in this movie, and all around the characters are really enjoyable and fun to watch. I think these are really well-made films, and I think this is the granddaddy of them all so far. And so I found it really refreshing and really cool that this is a movie that exists today in 2024/2025 that everyone can really enjoy. Kids can enjoy it for, Sonic, Tails, and his friends, and all like the zany action scenes and the fun dialogue and the goofy lines and the jokes. But then you can have the adults enjoy the story, the morals and the lessons learned by the characters, and then also the more highbrow jokes, I guess you could say. So I really, really enjoyed that. I found that to be a really refreshing element that I appreciated from all three of these movies. and I think this film is a great time, and visually it looks really, really cool. Not just talking about the cinematography, I think they shoot the locations really, really well, from Tokyo to space, to all of the sets that they utilize in this movie, but the CG, the VFX in this movie and the previous two are incredible, and I just think what this movie does on a technical level, it really succeeds in. But yeah, that was Sonic the Hedgehog 3. What a fun, interesting mini journey this has been. Like I said at the first episode of this Sonic series for Nerd Theater, it's kind of a return to the roots of my channel. Like I said before, my channel started out very Sonic heavy, and I have undeniably gone in a different direction with the channel, but it was cool to kind of go back and check up on the blue blur in a cinematic way. But yeah, I love Sonic. I'm still a fan. I think I'll probably always be a fan to some degree. And it was cool to see this movie series and see its full potential be fully reached. I really have high hopes for the fourth movie. I hope they keep this quality consistent. And it's clear to me at this point that Jeff Fowler and the crew involved in this movie series really do care about the video game series. Like, it's clear to me that they did their research, they did their homework, and they are seeking out to make very satisfying movies for the Sonic fan base. So in a world where we've kind of become used to video game movies more or less being not great, it's awesome that this is challenging that standard. And I hope that Sonic 4 completely delivers on that front. I hope they continue to keep this train going, because as long as they're making them, I'll be sure to check them out, and you can definitely bet that I'll be doing a Nerd Theater on the fourth film whenever it is that comes out. I think it's probably slated for a 2026 release if I had to guess, but I am excited to see where they go from here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope my unfiltered thoughts weren't too much of the ramblings of a madman, but I had a lot of fun doing this video, and I had a lot of fun watching Sonic 3, so please check it out if you haven't. I hope you're not still watching if you haven't seen the movie yet, but if you are, thank you anyway, and thank you guys so much for watching. I had a fun time kind of taking this trip through the Sonic universe once again. So as always, thank you guys again, and until next time, stay tuned, you guys.